Or the member for Chifley.
Deputy Speaker, I participate in this debate as someone from a metropolitan area, but as someone who is proud to represent one of the largest Aboriginal populations in an urban environment in the country, here in Chifley, which sits in Darug land but has become home to people of all different nations within the lands of the Darug. And so whenever these type of discussions come before Parliament, I'll instantly want to be involved because of the fact that I represent so many, but also the fact that I feel strongly about the type of issues that I believe prevent people in my area from reaching their full potential. And I note here the presence of the member for Hasluck, who has visited the area of Chifley earlier this year as the chair of the committee investigating the recognition of our First Peoples in the nation's constitution, along with other members as well. And from my point of view, some of the things that the previous speaker touched upon, I wanted to, the member for Fisher, deal with as well, because as much as this has an impact or is a focus on remote communities, what happens is that people from other lands move into an urban setting, and the issues I feel actually are bound by a common thread across a number of areas, be they in education, that prevents, in some cases, if it's not strong enough, people being able to exercise their economic opportunity and progress in their own way, being able to draw off a basis of skills. But there are other issues as well, support services that are required to help people maintain their potential. The type of things that we are concerned about, often in terms of when the Abbott government cut the IAS, which is the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, suggestions were being put forward that this was being done to improve or cut out waste and inefficiencies. Nearly $500 million in funding that's been cut. And if we're serious on a whole range of issues or a whole range of areas in dealing with the type of things that have prompted some of the comments that have been extended in this debate, you can't do it by sheer will alone. You need to have the resources to back it up, which is why I feel strongly about the fact that when for example, as people rightly say, unfair, debacle, lack of consultation being the themes that have come out in the way that the Indigenous Advancement Strategy has been managed and the way that the funding has been cut. You cannot do a serious job on this strategy if you are cutting the funding in the way that it is being done. Critical frontline services been held in limbo since the last budget, not this budget, the last budget. And there are organisations that are trying to negotiate new funding contracts more than a year since the actual strategy itself was implemented. And then withdrawing federal funding for municipal and essential services in remote communities is not only concerning for those areas, but then I worry, from my perspective, about the downstream impact, particularly when 500 of the 964 organisations that received funding, they being of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander organisations, they see the way that the program's been managed, a new mandatory incorporation requirement, seeing 56 of the successful organisations receiving more than $500,000 will be required to incorporate rather than to opt to incorporate. And there's been a lack of consultation and engagement with communities about the strategy as a whole. And in my area, I've seen, for example, some of the biggest organisations that would have benefited from this funding, for instance, the Budakarbin Aboriginal Corporation, been around for over nearly 25 years, serving or managing nearly 13,000 cases. Through a combination of IAS and funding cuts, they're currently at risk of losing their continuation of funding. And they've only been guaranteed funding up for the next year, into 2016, and they've recently faced substantial cuts and threats to their services from the state government as well. And organisations like Learning Ground as well in Bidwell, that also have a high proportion of young people from Aboriginal background, face their funding being cut. Now, if we have those funding cuts, plus, I might add, the Gonski arrangements, which would have directed higher levels of funding to my area, taking into account young Aboriginal people going into the schools there, when you see all the cuts that are happening, how do you skill people up? How do you prepare them for work? How do you prepare them for proper engagement in communities? And where I do have economic growth that's happening within the electorate itself and where we are working to get people involved, you can't do these things, as I said earlier, just by wishing them to occur. They need to have support, they need to have the funding, and they need to have a commitment that backs that up to to ensure that people can do the best in areas like mine and in areas that are the subject of this resolution.
I thank the member for Chifley. The question is that the motion